Sean Murphy came off the late shift at the print shop with black ink on his hands and the cold Chicago wind cutting through his jacket. He was half asleep when he turned the corner onto Lake Street, but the sight in front of the diner woke him fast. The red arrow above the windows was dark. It had always been the first thing people saw. At night it pointed down to the door, bright as a stop sign in the dark. Now the windows still glowed, but the arrow was dead. Under it, the old metal sign looked gray and tired. Elena Alvarez, who owned the diner, was standing outside with her arms wrapped around herself. Luis, her son, was beside her with a flashlight in one hand and a wrench in the other. "You saw it too," Elena said when she noticed Sean. "Yeah. When did it go out?" "Just after dark," she said. "I was in the back, and then there was a pop. It died before I could get to the switch. N." Luis held up a folded paper. "City inspection at 6:30 in the morning. The inspector is coming back after that complaint from the landlord. If the sign is still dark, she can tag us as closed." Sean looked from the paper to the dead arrow. The diner had been on Lake Street for almost 30 years. People got coffee there before work, after the bars closed, and on cold mornings when the L train was slow and the sidewalks were slick. If the sign stayed dark, the place would look shut down even if the coffee pot was still hot. Elena saw the look on his face. "I called 2 electricians," she said. "One said tomorrow." The other did not pick up. "What broke?" Sean asked. Luis tapped the side panel under the sign. "Maybe the starter. Maybe a fuse. We opened it, but we don't have the right part." Sean had spent enough time in the print shop to know that old signs were stubborn things. They looked simple from the street, but inside there were wires, tubes, and parts that had to match just right. He also knew one more thing. A dark sign on Lake Street could hurt a place fast. "I know a shop on the south side," he said. "If they have the part, I can get it." Elena's face tightened. "Sean, it's almost midnight. Then it's a good time to move fast." She stared at him for a second, then nodded once. "Take my card. And take cash for the train." "No, I got my card." "Take both," she said. "If this place gets tagged, I don't know what happens next. I am not losing this diner over one dead arrow." Sean took the money. It was folded small, warm from her hand. He shoved it in his pocket, pulled his hood up, and started toward the station at the end of the block. The Lake Street Green Line station was only a few minutes away, but the wind made it feel longer. The platform was crowded with late riders and tired faces. A digital sign flashed, "Delayed," in pale orange letters. Sean looked up, then down the tracks. Nothing but darkness and the sound of steel rattling somewhere far off. A man in a janitor's uniform leaned on the rail next to him. "You going west or east?" "East first," Sean said. "Then south." The man gave a short laugh. "Well, good luck. The Green Line is having a bad night, and..." Sean checked the screen again. 5 minutes became 12. 12 became 20. A train finally rolled in with brakes screaming and windows wet from the cold. People shoved in, shoulder to shoulder. Sean found a spot by the door and held the pole with one hand and Elena's cash with the other. The train shook across the dark city. He watched streetlights slide by in quick lines. At the next stop, 2 nurses got on, still in scrubs. A man with a grocery bag slept with his head against the glass. Across the aisle, a woman in a coat too thin for the weather stared at her phone and frowned at the screen. The train stopped again, then sat. A voice came over the speaker, flat and tired. "We are being held momentarily due to a signal problem ahead." "Of course," someone behind Sean muttered. Sean looked at his phone. The battery was at 30%. He had the name of the shop saved from an old delivery slip, Manny's Neon Supply, near 35th. He sent a text, "Need one starter for an old red arrow sign." "Got a minute?" The reply came fast. "Yes." "Come now. Rolling gate, still up." That helped, but not enough. The train sat in the dark tunnel for so long that Sean started to feel the time slipping away like water down a drain. He thought of Elena at the diner, sitting under the dead sign with the city paper on the counter. He thought of Louis, trying to fix something with the wrong tools. He thought of the bright red arrow that had pointed people in for years. It had been there when he was a kid eating pancakes with his mother after night shifts. It had been there when he came home from school in the winter, and the steam from the kitchen windows mixed with the cold air. Now it was just a dark shape over the street. At last, the train moved again. He got off at the transfer station in the loop, crossed a wet platform, and caught a southbound train that groaned like it did not want to leave. By then, the city was quieter. The bars had emptied. The cleaners were out. The streets looked shiny under streetlights, and the first gray edge of dawn was not far off. Manny's Neon Supply sat between a closed barber shop and a laundromat that never seemed to sleep. The metal gate was half down. A small sign in the window said, "Open for service calls." Manny Ortega, a thin man with wire glasses and a knit cap, was behind the counter when Sean pushed in. "You are cutting it close," Manny said. "I know. I need the part for a red arrow sign. Elena Alvarez's place on Lake Street." Manny's face changed at the name. Elena? She still feeds half the block on a bad day. And that's her. Manny went to the back shelf, climbed a step stool, and came down with a small box. He opened it and held up a clean little part, wrapped in paper. "This is the last one I got that size. If the old tube is not burned out, this should bring it back. Ack." Sean let out a breath he had not known he was holding. "How much?" Manny waved the question away. "Pay me next week. Or bring me one of those print proofs with the new logo." Sean reached for the box. "You sure?" Manny gave a small shrug. "I remember when your mom used to sit in that diner after her shift. She kept me awake with coffee more than once. Go. The sky is already changing color." Sean thanked him, shoved the box into his jacket, and ran back to the station. The next train was worse than the first. It stopped twice on the way north. Once, the lights flickered so hard that everybody looked up at the same time. Sean kept checking the box in his pocket, as if the part might vanish. He wanted to call Elena, but the signal dropped under the tracks. By the time the train reached Lake Street again, the sky had gone from black to deep blue. When he stepped out of the station, the cold air had a pale edge to it. Delivery trucks were starting their routes. A bakery van was parked near the corner. Somewhere down the block, a man was hosing mud from the sidewalk in front of a store. At the diner, Elena had moved a desk lamp onto the counter. Louis was in the back with a mug of coffee and a tool bag open beside him. He looked up fast when Sean came in. "You get it?" Sean set the box on the counter. "I got it." Elena closed her eyes for a second. Then she opened them and said, "Thank God." Louis tore the wrapping off the part. "You sure this is right?" Manny said it would fit. Louis held it up, checked the shape, and nodded. Looks right to me. They did not waste time. Louis took Sean out the back door to the fire escape. It was old, narrow, and a little loose where it met the wall. The metal steps rang under their shoes. The wind was stronger on the side of the building, and it pushed cold air through Sean's coat. Be careful on that top step, Louise said. The last owner patched it once, and I don't trust it. I don't trust it either, Sean said. He climbed higher until he was level with the sign box. Up close, the red arrow was bigger than it looked from the street. The paint on the metal frame was chipped. The side panel hung open on one rusted screw. Inside, the wires were dusty, the old tube was dark, and one small part was blackened from heat. Sean slipped on his work gloves and pulled out a screwdriver from the tool bag. Below him, he heard Elena coming out the back door with a flashlight. You all right up there? Ask me again in 5 minutes, he called down. The first screw was stuck hard. He leaned into it, and the metal gave with a squeal. A piece of rust fell onto his sleeve. He took a breath and worked the old part free. The new one was tiny in his hand, too small for all the trouble it had caused. He slid it into place, checked the wires twice, and tightened the cap with careful fingers. Then he stopped. For a moment, nothing moved. The street below was quiet. A bus sighed at the corner. A train rumbled somewhere underground. Sean wiped his palm on his jeans and looked down at Elena. She was standing by the alley wall, her face turned up toward him. Louis had the flashlight pointed at the open panel. Well? Elena asked. Almost, Sean said. But the word felt thin. He turned the power switch off and on once. Still nothing. Louis frowned. Did we miss a wire? Sean leaned closer. The old clip on the side had a loose end. He pressed it in place and clicked it down. Then he tried again. At first, there was only a faint hum. Sean held his breath. The hum grew louder, low and steady, like a wire waking up. Then the red tube flickered once. Twice. A thin red line appeared. Inside the arrow, broke, and came back. Come on, Elena whispered below. Sean gave the side panel one last push and heard the part settle home with a soft snap. The red arrow came alive. It flashed bright red, then brighter, until it burned clean in the cold air. Light spilled across the alley wall, across Elena's face, across the wet steps of the fire escape. The arrow pointed straight to the diner door like it had been waiting all night to do its job. Sean stood still on the top step, one hand on the frame and one on the rail, while the whole sign hummed above him. A horn sounded down Lake Street. A train slid into the station, and for a second the red arrow caught in its windows and ran along the cars like fire. Louis let out a long laugh. There it is. Elena was already wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Get down from there before you fall, and make my morning worse. Sean grinned and started down the fire escape. His knees felt weak, but they were shaking from relief now, not fear. When he reached the alley, the three of them stood there for a moment and looked up at the sign. The light made the old brick wall look warm. It made the diner windows glow stronger. It made the whole street seem less empty. Then a city car pulled up to the curb. A woman in a gray coat stepped out with a clipboard and a small bag of papers. She looked at the red arrow, then at Elena, then at Sean, who still had black grease on his gloves. Inspection for Alvarez Diner? She asked. Elena nodded, straightened her apron, and said, "That's us." The woman glanced again at the sign. The arrow was still steady, bright against the gray morning. She stepped inside, checked the kitchen, looked at the back exit, and walked back to the counter. Sean stood by the coffee machine while Luis waited, with his hands in his pockets. Elena stayed calm, but her foot tapped once against the tile. The inspector signed the paper. "Your electrical fix is good," she said. "Keep the panel closed. And I want that loose step on the fire escape fixed soon. Print." Elena let out a breath so deep it seemed to leave her whole body. "You got it." The woman gave a small nod and handed back the form. "You were lucky someone got to that sign before sunrise." Elena looked at Sean. "Not luck," she said. "Work." The inspector's mouth twitched, almost a smile, and then she was gone. By the time the first customers came in from the station, the diner smelled like coffee, bacon, and toast. The windows fogged up from the heat inside. A man in a warehouse jacket pushed open the door and stopped when he saw the red arrow blazing above the street. "Thought you were closed," he said. "Not today," Luis told him. Elena filled a cup and set it in front of Sean before he could say no. It was hot enough to sting his hands. He took a long sip and felt the tiredness in his shoulders start to ease. Outside, the sky over Lake Street was turning pink. The train doors at the station opened and closed. People in coats hurried past, and some of them looked up when the red arrow caught the morning light and flashed back at them. Sean stood at the window with his coffee and watched the street wake up. The diner was still here. The sign was still on. And from the station to the corner, the red arrow led people home.